Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. I have a feeling that we are now live on screen and you're hopefully all there. So we'll go steadily through the first couple of slides as you all hopefully settle in and make sure you can all connect. First and foremost, thank you ever so much for your time joining us this afternoon. And we're going to really try and cover quite a lot of ground that all sits around a number of crackdowns that the government is seemingly looking at, such as late payments. And look at what it means to us, what we need to do, what we need to think about, what we need to worry about, and what we can maybe perhaps even ignore for a while, but hopefully not too much of that. So to get started, the two presenters you've got this afternoon is myself from Causeway. I've basically been with Causeway for well over 25 years now. I've been involved in digital business for a long time. I've been involved with the product Tradex, which maybe some of you know about. I've been involved in European activities around digital business and basically trying to make it happen, trying to get people to work out how to connect efficiently. My background originally was on the supply side in the construction sector and getting frustrated with the problems we were given because paper sort of went wrong. And if you're a supplier, often it's considered to be your fault. So a lot of background from within the industry as well, which will hopefully come out as we go through the sessions. And a brief introduction, Ellen, who's very kindly joined us from Purchase to Pay Network. I'm slightly in awe because Ellen has a huge amount of knowledge, experience, and is currently engaged in these subjects. So she's a good wingman to have for this presentation session. Ellen, over to you for a moment.
Thanks very much, Tim, and I'm delighted to be with you all today and delighted to join you on today's session. And yes, so I've been running PPN, which is a Purchase to Pay network, for coming on for 18 years, so almost a couple of decades in this industry, which has given me a lot of background information around this topic to do with late payments, of course, and digitization. And like yourself, Tim, that does extend outwards into Europe and beyond. And some of the legislation that's coming our way and is already here for a lot of our competitors and countries around the globe. So delighted to talk to you this morning, and let's get deep into some of those topics and find out what's heading our way in the UK.
Yep, indeed. Well, we certainly shall. Okay, so just to conclude the intro bit, a little word from our sponsors. So Causeway Technologies, as I said, I've been with them for a long time, has software that really covers the whole sort of spectrum of the construction process. And when it comes to digital business and integrated and automated construction, that's really quite key because these various bits sort of tie together. And, you know, the whole idea is behind what we're doing at the moment is trying to find some way to make construction and maintenance activities sort of flow more naturally. And the subject we're looking at today sits mainly under the supply chain area. We've got electronic invoicing and digital receipting, which we'll talk about. But if you want to know anything more about our solutions, please go to causeway.com. So that's a little bit about Causeway. And now over to Ellen again.
Yes, thanks for that, Tim. So you've got a little slide in front of you which gives a flavour of what PPN's all about. And we've got in the middle there, connect and grow. And you know what? That's what we're really most about most of all. It's about a community. And we have around 15,000 individuals within that community, mostly around finance, accounts payable, and procure to pay. And the purpose behind the organisation is, of course, to provide that platform where people can get some more information around digitization, but also around what's heading our way in terms of legislation, new cultural practices. And we do that by connecting people through in-person events, virtual events similar to this one, and also some more intimate roundtables, for example. And we have our next event, in-person event, coming up on the 4th of November. You should see some information about that on the bottom of that slide there. That's at the Soho Hotel. So if you connect onto our PPN website, then you'll be able to find more information about that if you wanted to come and join us and find out more about what we're going to be talking about today. I'm also one of the co-founders of the UK eLab, and that is something which Tim is also involved with, and we're one of the groups behind the consultation or provided information towards the consultation on e-invoicing. And so that will inform some of the conversations that we have today. In a nutshell.
Thank you. Yeah, the UK eLab is very interesting because it brings together government, industry, technical people around these sort of subjects which are becoming of current interest, shall we say, to our government. Okay, there is an agenda coming up in a couple of slides' time which has the housekeeping on it, so we're slightly breaking the normal flow rules. But anyway, I wanted just to set the scene quickly in 2 slides, really just to make a few headline points around this whole subject area. Firstly, I think I've probably said this every year for 25 years, but it is, I think, true and has been true for 25 years because we still sometimes need to turn the corner that we've been looking at for some time. But there are a lot of things going on internationally. A lot of companies that are working in the construction sector inevitably either operate in Europe as well as in the UK and elsewhere, but they have supply chains that cross boundaries. So I think what is going on outside of the UK as well as inside is relevant. But there's also a lot of domestic consultation and regulation coming through. The government uses the word the toughest crackdown on late payments that we've seen. So we will see what comes through into law, but that is definitely an intent, and it is something which remains an issue in our industry, and we can't duck that. And so this is all putting finance procurement, under the spotlight. And I put a couple of little bits at the bottom there because it's always nice to duck behind what someone else is saying. We've made progress. I know a lot of companies, a lot of individuals have really worked hard to try and resolve some of the issues around payment processing. But the CIOB have pointed out that, disproportionately, there's a lot of SMEs in the construction sector, and we are still seen to be a bit of a hotspot when it comes to the amount of late payment issues that are there. And one of the last things that Liz Barkley, the Small Business Commissioner, said before she sort of ended her tenure, really pointed, and you can read the words on the screen there, that a number of construction firms have signed up, have done good things, but it seemed to have drifted away a little bit, and maybe the focus had gone. And so that engagement around this subject is key. So I think we have to recognize that you may be sat in a chair where you feel very comfortable that you've done everything you could, but as an industry, there is still work to be done. So that is very much part of the scene setting. And then the second slide just picks up some of the headlines that have come out around this whole reason. So why is the government really having a bit of a hit around late payments again? And it's these figures here, the cost to the economy, how many businesses are affected by it, the amount of money which is tied up, which could be flowing through the economy, but it's just sat there waiting to flow through. A lot of time wasted chasing for it, a lot of businesses that close as a result of it. And the one at the end there is interesting, a number of businesses that basically don't trade with certain companies because of their payment. So it does, in a way, have limiting factors as well. So these are bits I've taken off a government document that came out just a couple of days ago. So I wanted just to share that to set the scene. So the agenda, we've got the 5 points and a Q&A at the end. You'll see on the right-hand side, the housekeeping that I should have mentioned before. You're muted so that we can hopefully get through without being attacked, but you can attack us at the end. There will be a chance to come back and ask some questions, and hopefully, we'll try and address those as openly and as fairly as we can. There's a Q&A function, which you should be able to see on the screen. Please use that to raise any questions that you've got. The recording will be available, and there's various bits you can set up to follow to find out more. And there is, I think, a brief survey that Laura has kindly arranged at the end so that we'll get some feedback on how the session went. What we're going to do now is to go through those 5 areas of the agenda one by one. There's probably more than enough to talk about on each one of those areas in this time, so I will nudge the discussion along a bit. And we're going to kind of hopefully do it as a bit of a fireside chat without the flames, because it's a bit dangerous at this time of year. I'm pinging back and forth between myself and Ellen. And again, I'm very grateful for Ellen for joining us. So the 5 areas, the global state of e-invoicing and why it matters. Let's have a look at the world around. Number two is the UK's government consultation on e-invoicing, which has happened, and they're now chewing over those results. So we'll see what comes out of that with a lot of interest. How late payment measures will impact large contractors. Do we need to worry about it if we're involved? And I would suggest this is everybody as well, but large contractors have a very key part to play, and they may well be the ones that they target in terms of any action they want to take. Four, why receipting is now central to payment assurance. In other words, the moment that you receive the goods, getting that bit right, if that happens correctly, often a lot of the issues then fall away. And then the last point is looking at some practical steps that we could take. Where may be the things that we're not doing that we could do that would help to move the agenda forward, whether or not the government is actually pushing us to go that way or not. So the first area is to look at the global state of e-invoicing and why it matters. So if I can just kick off with a question I'll throw at Ellen to get things moving. If you look at the whole context of fair payments and you look at what's going on with government and that processing or whatever, we're looking here at construction. Do you think government, and do you see construction being a focal point, or is it that everyone's tarred with the same brush?
Well, I mean, I think that the construction industry is instrumental to the UK economy and to the growth of the UK economy. And as you mentioned before, within the industry, there is a long tail of small suppliers quite often within the industry, and some of those smaller suppliers may actually be key suppliers who, if you pay late, then there introduces risk into the supply chain. So I think, yes, to some degree, the government have singled out the construction industry, and you can probably see that they have by looking at the small business plan and the fact that they put in that extra clause around retention payments and the possible banning of those retention payments for the construction industry as a separate piece in the proposals. They wouldn't have done that unless the construction industry was something that they were particularly targeting. But I think it's fair to say that it's a economy-wide issue. There was something that was shared by the Small Business Commissioner and the government recently about the fact that 38 companies go out of business every day simply due to the fact of late payments, and that as a statistic is terrible, really, because that has a huge impact on the economy itself, let alone looking at those businesses themselves and what that means in terms of individuals, their salaries, and ongoing issues to the supply chain. I mean, we talk about small businesses, and if you're a large business, to some degree, some people think, well, do I need to worry about that? Well, when you start looking at your supply chain and how your larger business is supported, then I think it becomes a major issue. And, we only have to look at what happened with large organizations in the past when they did, turn their head to one side and not look at what was happening in the long tail. And that's where all the issues happen. And above all of that, it's an ethical issue, isn't it? People should pay their smaller suppliers and any suppliers on time.
Yeah, and I think it affects, when a company goes under, and sadly a lot of them do, it affects their customers and their supply chains as well. So it's not almost that there are a lot of consequences beyond that company on their own. So if we go back to looking at the world around us, there's a slide I try to pull together. This is really quite a hard thing to do because every country does things differently between business to government, business to business. So there's lots of different ways of cutting and slicing this. But the UK does kind of stand out as being one of very few where, we don't yet have a plan for, sort of really driving the adoption of electronic invoicing. I think the Netherlands and Ireland have both had their consultations and they're looking at what they do next. So they're probably even a bit ahead of us as well. Do you think the UK, and I'm sort of saying, I think we do, like to avoid mandating because it's not a British thing to do? And do you think that's healthy for us? Or is that, I feel it's been a bit of a challenge that we've kind of wanted the cake of being a little bit more liberal, and without pushing too hard, but we then get the consequences of that, which is we maybe don't make progress, and perhaps we're at risk of not being as competitive as others.
Well, I think the momentum is there. The difference now, I think, to what might have happened in the past is that the momentum is there with other countries across Europe and over the globe. So I think that the UK, although it's been reticent, as you say, and we're not naturally inclined to mandate things and say that you must do this, you must do that. I think that the momentum, because it's there across the rest of the world, we can't afford anymore to sit back and think, well, we're separate to this. Somehow or other, we can choose to do exactly what we want to do and ignore everything else. And I think it's important to say in terms of mandating, we don't necessarily have to talk about mandating in terms of including the VAT requirement. We can talk about mandating e-invoicing from a simply an economy-wide issue. So all of the benefits that we might talk around, efficiency gains, fraud avoidance, reporting, all of those things can come about. ESG, for example, can come about from mandating e-invoicing without including the VAT element. I mean, that's something we'll probably talk about a little bit later.
Yeah.
And perhaps it is our natural inclination to let businesses choose, but I do think it is holding us back. I mean, I think probably the advantage for us in our circumstance right now is that we can look at what other countries have done, what's worked well, what hasn't worked so well, and to some extent we can cherry pick some of those things which have worked well and
Yeah.
make and include that within our mandatory system. It's something
Yes,
which
yeah, I agree. I mean, being an optimist, I think it's quite nice to feel that yes, we might be late, but actually we got all the advantages of having watched what's worked, what hasn't worked, so we can slightly cherry pick now.
well, as Eleanor Roosevelt once said, learn from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself. So there's
No,
something
that's
to do. I mean,
it's very, yeah.
Tim, I was going to ask you, do you thinking about the mandates that there are across the globe, do you see many of your customers' supply chains reaching out into Europe and beyond into those areas where they do have those existing e-invoicing mandates? And if that's the case, how are your customers responding to those e-invoicing mandates?
Yeah, well, the answer is yes, they do. But if I'm honest, very little has come in the way of having to support the mandate. So whether it's a construction thing or it's just that actually each country is doing things slightly differently. So at the moment, we're exchanging across many different borders. But we're now starting to see people asking for things like PEPL. We're getting people who are asking for things in Zugford or e-Reckoning, which is the German format. So it's starting to appear, but it's been slower than I expected. But most of the main contractors, they very definitely have either operations across Europe, and they certainly have supply chains across Europe. And we have transactions going across probably every one of the countries you can see on the chart. So it's happening, but I don't think the harmonization is there in the way that I would like it to be, despite a lot of things that are going on. And then the slide I just put up briefly, I go back to here. This slide, this goes back to 2016, so don't take too much from it, but it talks about where e-invoicing volumes were at that point in time. I think the UK now is about 45%. So we're probably getting into that sort of darker blue.
It kind of depends, Tim. It depends on where you're looking, and also who's been asked and how big that number of people was included in that research. Because, as you know, sometimes people will say that they do have e-invoicing where they might simply be talking about, I don't know, a PDF and that they've sent on an email, and they call that e-invoicing. So you do have to take some of that reporting, particularly if it's from 2016, with a little bit of a pinch of salt.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that we definitely overestimate on the basis that we include things which aren't really what I would call digital e-invoicing. But the reason I wanted to put this slide up is it shows where we are, and it shows Italy, like many of us, sort of being, quite low down in the number of transactions. But it just making the point, the comparison to today, Italy was one of the first to put in an e-invoice mandate. They have required that it's It's a clearance model, so you have to get the state to approve your invoice as it goes through.
Yeah.
They now have over 95% of invoices supposedly go through digitally, and as I'll show you in a moment, their VAT gap is going down, rapidly as well. So it's interesting as the UK considers what we should do here, that there is evidence of countries where they have made changes, and it has significantly, made a difference. And this slide, I think we'll then move on to the second area, just looks at the VAT gaps that we've got around the place and how they've changed. When you look at, people say, oh, well, Italy's VAT gap is bigger than ours, but it was 25% before they put in real-time reporting. Spain was 12%, it's now down to 4.6. So there's some remarkable drops in the VAT gaps, which puts a remarkably nice chunk of revenue back into the coffers of the tax authorities.
It does. Yeah, it does, and I think that was the particular driving force for Italy, and I think Italy in Europe was one of the largest. That was one of the largest VAT gap in Europe was in Italy, going sort of way back when, which was one of the main drivers for them, and I think they've saved something like 8 billion euros by mandating it in the way that they have, and I think across the VAT gap across Europe as a whole was astonishing. It was something eye-watering, like 90 billion euros, which they've been able to reduce down to something like, I think, 22 billion the last time that I looked, which still sounds like a lot, but it's a huge difference to how it had been. And that has been almost entirely due to those mandates being in place.
Yeah, no, very true. Okay, which is a good round off then for that first section. We now sort of move into the secondary, looking at the government consultation. So we've got that context of what's going on around us, which may or may not be of direct relevance. But the UK government has now undertaken this consultation process. It's a fairly high level consultation. And I think that what they're trying to do is to sort of say, well, okay, certainly the current government making a big issue of being competitive, growing, and my goodness, do they need a bit of tax right now? So what's your feeling on, given that they started to look at the whole area of, and if I think the next slide maybe gives a bit more detail. So these are the areas, I put in blue the bits that I think really impact on business, and the bits in dark blue are the bits that really are there for government. And it's quite clear there's a government and an HMRC drive. And if the Treasury gets involved, there'll be an even stronger fiscal drive behind this. So there's a number of different forces at play. But what's your feel about where this is likely to end up from all the discussions that you've had?
Well, I think that the different departments have different perspectives to some degree. And of course, that VAT, being able to claim that VAT back and to drive that back into the economy is a driver for some of them. But I think that if you only have that as a driving force, and I said right at the beginning of the conversation, the work that we've been doing with the UK eLab has mostly been around the business benefits for it, rather than necessarily focusing on VAT. I think it's very difficult if you only go down that route, because that won't win hearts and minds. You have to think of this as not being something which is a tool, a sharp-edged tool that's going to be used by the government to get what they want. I mean, that can be a part of it, and of course, putting that money back into the economy makes absolute sense. But it doesn't have to be the only way. And if you're talking to business and you come at business industry, some of your customers in the construction industry, for example, and say that's the reason we're doing this, and you have to implement this kind of technology or change your processes because this is what we want. I think it's a difficult sell, and it needs to be something which can be understood, and it should be around those efficiency gains, getting some really good information from your supply chain, enable your supply chain to be more proactive. You can get some really good information from using e-invoicing. It's not just about paying somebody quicker. You can actually use some of that information and the reporting from that to drive your business forward and to become more sustainable and to grow your business as well. So yeah, I mean, are you asking me what kind of model I think the
Well, we'll
business
come to
will?
the model. We'll come to the
Okay.
models in a moment, I suppose. I'll talk. I'll come back to that. I'll hold that point for a moment because I think that is a very key point. Just a couple of bits sort of background. A government of a slightly different colour did look at this before, and they had an inquiry. They identified, I think actually behind the scenes about 8 billion they reckon they could save just from a bit of B2G e-invoicing. They published they could save 2 billion. They put the report out, and of course then we had a government election, and then of course we had Brexit. So things kind of got lost. But what they did do at that point was put into primary legislation as part of the Small Business and Enterprise Employment Act, the legislation which allows a B2G mandate, and actually from bits I've read recently, it probably could be tweaked to allow from a B2B mandate. So some of the hurdles that government would have to cross to get actually into a mandate, appear to have been resolved. So the question I was going to ask you is, do you think at this point government perceives this as being high risk, medium risk, or low risk in terms of implementing what has been an overdue change in my view, but for them might just seem like a brand new idea?
I think the trouble is when governments change, a lot of the information changes with it or goes with it because they're focusing on so many different things at the same time, as you can imagine. So, and I think there's something in the word e-invoicing that somehow or other, it doesn't sound very sexy, does it? It's not something which really is as a word itself. Does it win hearts and minds? I don't think so. So but what wraps around it as a piece of technology actually is, which is one of the reasons why I co-founded the UK eLab wanting to disseminate that information to the PPN network, because it has the capacity to really, done properly. I mean, and we'll probably go into that in a bit as well. It's not just something you can just plug in and play and therefore it all works, but done properly, it has the capacity to enable stability, enable growth, make your organization more competitive, and to make the reporting and therefore the KPIs you can draw from that something which can be can be a springboard to growth. So does the government think it's something easy? I think that they think that it's not necessarily easy, but some of the work and the groundwork has been done. And certainly some of the work that we've been doing in the UK eLab and PPN and other organizations like that has helped to show HMRC and DBT that actually it's not as hard as maybe they thought it was. So a lot of the work has been done. And as you said at the beginning of this conversation, the service providers are very mature in their thinking and the way that they work across the globe. And a lot of the organizations within the UK already do use e-invoicing to some degree, some of the larger organizations. So the foundation is there. It's just a question of matching expectations and drawing perhaps the government's knowledge on it up to the same level as other organizations or service providers, as I said, and making people feel at ease with it. When we talk about e-invoicing, it's easy to think of it as something particularly complex. But really what it is, it's just changing something which is in an unstructured format, be that paper or a PDF, and changing it into something which is structured and digitized, and you can see raises levels of visibility. It's not something scary. And I think the communication piece is what needs to be played out more.
Yeah, I'll definitely say amen to all of that. And I think the name e-invoicing is a challenge because it's only technically one of the document types. And we used to talk about EDI, but that became sort of hijacked to mean something old-fashioned and not what we were talking about. but it's everything. It's digital transactions throughout, the whole supply chain process, which need to be considered, and we'll look at that a bit later on. So going back to that point you made about the model,
Yeah.
so I don't intend on, we've got the time to go through, but in the consultation, the government has the opportunity to say, we'll centralize it, so we'll build some great big thing in the middle and you'll have to report through that. I think we expect that to be very unlikely, because most governments have realized that that is the route to ruin for most governments, to try and say, we'll do that. So we think it may well be decentralized, but whether they want to say, well, you need to register your invoice either in real time or retrospectively. So places like Ukraine, bless them, who have a mandate for some of their B2G, you have to report your invoice as a digital invoice into a government system. Would the UK do that, or would it require us a pre-check? So all these things are now in the melting pot. People like me sort of think any sort of nudge forward to try and do the right thing, please, would be good. But going back to your question before, where do you see or feel from the conversations you've had with HMRC and also with the Department of Business, what model do you think is likely to come out? And it's a hard question, because we'll know hopefully in the autumn statement a bit more. So it's a bit of a tough
exactly.
one to ask.
So don't quote me on this. But do you know? Yes, as you say, the consultation has been in place and it's closed, and they are just looking at the results of that consultation, and no decision has been made yet, of course. And I think if I'd going back to May, I was feeling pretty positive about a mandate, and that a mandate would definitely be the way that the UK was going to go. I felt a little bit of a wobble in June from various conversations that I've had, and I would say at the moment it's kind of on the fence, and it could go either way. I feel optimistic about it, but I'm not going to say that it definitely will happen. But if they do, I think it's most likely to be a PEPL four-corner model. Could be PEPL, most likely PEPL four-corner model. They might go down the five-corner model, but I think in either case it would be decentralized. You only have to look at what the successes of that model across the globe. You've got France, you've got Belgium, UAE, Singapore, Malaysia, and coming up next, Germany and Japan, etc. So they're all taking that structure. And I think some of those early adopters who talked about Italy, they had to cut their teeth before anybody else had, but their driver, the motivator for them was so strong, they had to do something. And they've been a fantastic success story, but that hasn't been without some of the detractions from the rest of the economy. It's worked in some ways. It's certainly worked in terms of getting the VAT back into the economy that was mostly lost through fraud, but it has caused some kind of hold-ups in terms of it being helpful for the wider economy and those efficiency gains that we would hope. Whereas the four-corner and five-corner model decentralized, particularly in a mature economy, I think would provide both the efficiencies that we need, and if you go down the five-corner model, put that money back into the UK economy, and HMRC would be certainly very happy with that. But I think that they are they know enough about it as a subject to know that it's not possible to really go down that route and that route alone. You can't drive forward with a sledgehammer to do something without really looking at those other benefits kind of first and foremost, really.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll find out hopefully soon enough. I think I agree with you. I think the likelihood is they'll probably do business to government and then business to business maybe second. I don't know why, because I think business to business needs it probably more than business to government, but that seems to be a cop-out option. I think the do nothing option would look really embarrassing, but hey, governments have done really embarrassing things in the past, so we don't know. So slightly nervous to see what happens on that.
I think the momentum is there right now, and I'm with you. It'd be a shame, I think, to miss out, particularly now. I mean, you mentioned the movement that was going forward with the last government, say sort of 10 years or so ago, I think we were in a different place then. And obviously the government took their eye off the ball, naturally so, because of Brexit and the issues around that, and that had to stop. But I think it would be a shame really now to not take advantage of what we know from around the globe and the momentum and the existing framework that there is already within the UK.
I completely agree. Okay, so moving on to our third section, and for those who might be watching the clock, don't panic, because the next three are slightly shorter. But a key part of this, and one of the drivers behind, whether you mandate e-invoicing or not, it's not just revenue, but it's also, it should be a way of helping with late payments. And that has definitely become, quite a sharp focus from the government. They published a document, or I think it was some online systems about time to pay up. And they're really trying to drive this whole area of, we're going to do a lot about this. We're going to tackle late payments, and we're going to give powers to the Small Business Commission so they can, name and shame, they can go and do spot checks and whatever. So this is quite a significant sort of, bit of theatre, but has it got real teeth? Do you think this will become law within the next sort of 6 to 12 months? And what's it going to mean to, major contractors, suppliers, everybody? Because late payments affects everyone.
Yeah, I think it will have teeth. I certainly have more teeth than it has been in the past. If you think about, for example, the Prompt Payment Code and the Fair Payment Code, they are, as the name suggests, codes, whereas what's being proposed at the moment will be moved into legislation. So some of those proposals, for example, making it a 60-day cap. And that potentially might move to 45 days in the next 5 years. That's within part of the proposals, and also to look at fines for persistent late payers, and also which we might talk about in a little bit as well, about making 30 days the maximum time by which you can raise queries, and then I think all of those things put together mean that there is far more teeth, and then raising it also as something which gets talked about at board level and for audit committees as well. I would say that gives it far more teeth, sharper teeth than it ever has done in the past. People will always find wriggle room, but I think that the wriggle room is getting a little bit smaller than it has been.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really key point. I mean, I was going to ask, and I will ask a question about the teeth, and actually how people then respond to that, because I think there's always that, until people think there are teeth and it really is going to affect them, then I think we've become pretty good in this country going, governments talk about a lot of things, but until they really do it, we don't tend to react, which is sometimes sensible and sometimes a huge shame. I think with this, if there are, really, really sort of definite teeth that are applied to this, then people might think, oh, okay, well, I don't want to get bitten. I don't want to do that, which obviously is intended to mean pay on time. But there's lots of grey, and construction has a huge issue around sort of grey when it comes to things like, well, there's queries, there's issues. It wasn't quite what I thought it was. And then there's these clocks. So there's the 30-day verification period, and there's a sort of 45 or 60-day clock in which to pay. Do you think there are issues around how people might sort of say, well, the clock didn't start for me because they didn't put the PO number on the invoice or whatever?
I think there's always going to be those things, but I think those are the issues which the proposals are trying to get around, and sometimes it can be. Well, in fact, most of the time, it's something which, as a result of perhaps a lack of awareness, and which is one of the things which the Small Business Commissioner aims to do, is to make sure that small businesses actually know, it sounds ridiculous, but how to put an invoice together, what it needs to have on it, and make sure that those elements are right before it gets issued, so that it prevents some of those invalid invoices coming about in the first place. But I think they've been fairly clear about the fact that that 30 days starts as soon as that invoice is received. So once the receipt of the invoice has happened, then regardless of what your process has been or whatever's happened in the meantime, 30 days from the receipt of that invoice, you have to pay it. It will be then treated as a invoice that's good to go. And then that needs to be paid in full. And not only that, if it goes beyond that, you'll also be paying the interest on that too. So I think all of that goes to play towards make sure you've got your processes right in the first place. And maybe you need to identify, and I know some larger organizations do, identify who your smaller suppliers are as well, so that you make sure that you are paying them on time. So.
No, agreed. And the point actually you'd raised before about construction, and is it fair that they sort of get a bit of a bad rap? I mean, I think sort of just pick up on that point. I think, yes, it is probably fair that construction does get a bit of a bad rap, but not for everybody. There are some notable exceptions and people doing, good things. But I think cash flow is always a challenge for construction, and tight margins is always a challenge for construction. So, if everyone was being paid and the money was flowing through, maybe some of that would go away. But I do think in construction, there are some definite specific challenges that, that we do have to face. And I think if we tie that with sort of things like, digital invoicing, we sort of bring those 2 points together. There's a lot of things on this slide that I would support that says, well, if we could do things in a more digital and integrated and automated way, it would help. And do you agree, or do you think actually you get an invoice, just pay it?
No, I think that you should be looking at your processing and your technology as a whole end-to-end process. I think it's very difficult if you've got elements of manual processing within your organization, then you're putting yourself at risk of potentially paying late and all sorts of other things as well. I know we're focusing at the moment on late payments, but I think it's not just about that. It's about you and your organization and your reputation. For example, if you continue to pay late, and we just talked about those new powers that are potentially coming into play from the Small Business Commissioner, if you are named and shamed, what will that do if you are a listed company, publicly listed company? What will that do to your share price, for example? Okay, if this company can't even pay on time, are they having, as you say, cash flow issues? Do we need to take a closer look at them? And if I'm somebody fresh out of university or wherever, I'm looking for where I want to place my talents, am I going to look at a company who is in the news for consistently paying late? Because if they do that, what does it say about their culture generally? I think it doesn't say very great things.
No, it doesn't.
So, I mean, I think that we can't necessarily look at things in isolation. You need to make sure that you are looking at your processing as a whole end to end and putting in digitization where you can. And I know, and you probably find this too, Tim, I don't know, and let me know if it's different, but within processing, there's still very often elements of Excel and manual processing at sticking points between various different types of technology.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, I'm seeing a few good questions coming in. So just moving on, the last sort of 2 quick points he wanted to cover. One was this question about receipting. And the point behind this is that it's receipting, the yellow bit in the middle. The point here is that if we can get the receipting bit right, if everyone goes, okay, that's what I sent you, you've received it, it matched with the order, therefore the invoice comes out, it should work. So there's a lot of work going on around this particular process, certainly within Causeway. But are you seeing this as being sort of a pivot point in what's going on around, or do you think again it's not as important as, again, you've got the invoice, could you pay it?
No, I mean, I think receipting is important. I mean, I think you need to know that you have received the goods that you have asked for, that you were expecting, and that the invoice reflects accurately what's been delivered. And I think if you can again automate that and have that as part of your processing, then you're going to be able to be more sure about saying, actually, this invoice is good to go. I can make this payment.
Yeah.
If you're unclear on those things, and I think also it's probably good to point out here that that's where the fraudulent activity can take place as well. And I know everybody, and no doubt people on this webinar today are thinking, well, that could never happen here. I've heard about that happening, but that can never happen here. We're very tight on that. But I can say that we report on fraudulent activity pretty much every week within PPN, and 9 times out of 10, it is between somebody working within the organization and say a supplier, and they get into cahoots, and it's not quite often around that delivery and receipting process and procedure. So I do think it's important. It's important in terms of efficiency, and it's also important in terms of combating fraud, and of course making sure that you've got transparency in your reporting as well.
Yeah, and this is why you talk about the term e-invoicing. To me, it's all the documents. If we had, a digital invoice, had a digital order, we had a digital delivery and a receipt, that they could be more easily matched, and hopefully a lot of this stuff would roll straight through to approved for payment in due time. Okay, keeping an eye on the clock again. So the last bit we talked about, and please do throw any questions or points, Ellen, back in if I've missed anything key on that. I just wanted to give us a couple minutes to look at some of the practical steps that we could take, because if I look at it from my selfish perspective, having sort of worked with digital transactions flying through, there's a lot of issues around, well, it's digital, therefore we've done something. And I go, well, no, there's good digital and there's digital. I'm glad you've done something digital, but if I don't understand what your product ID is, if I can't read your units of measure because it doesn't make sense, if I can't reference it to the purchase order or the contract, and I have no idea where it came from or went to, I'm always hampered. And then the second part is looking at the different kinds or the different documents that are there. Are you surprised that, although we've been doing this for 25 years, we still face these issues? And do you think that things like the late payment drive and mandating invoicing will miraculously resolve some of these quality issues? Or do you think we just have to deal with it slowly?
Well, I don't like the word slowly, but I
retract.
But I think that miracles don't come about overnight. I think that you have to put the work in up front, and it's very important that organizations make sure that they do understand their data, make sure that your data is clean, because there's all sorts of issues which go on, and most of those are caused by manual processing. Look at those processes as well. Do they align? And look at your tech. Look at your tech stack. Very few organizations have just one element of it. Wouldn't it be great if you just plug in something and it all works miraculously? But I think you need to put the work in up front and make sure you map your processes properly, and don't forget the people as well. Who have you got involved in that process? Have you got the right departments involved? We talk about end-to-end processing. Have you got procurement aligned with finance? Is the tech aligning across those different areas as well? Have you mapped your KPIs to your outcomes? No point just looking at your KPIs and doing nothing with them. I know several organizations that do that. And if you're talking about e-invoicing specifically, one of the really good key KPIs that you can have is to do how many invoices you're processing manually versus e-invoicing, and that gives you a really good idea as to which of within your supply chain are actually onboarded properly in the way that you think they are. Because you might think you've got e-invoicing implemented. Who's using it? How's it being used? It's really good to way to actually leverage that supplier onboarding element too.
Yeah.
And I know we're possibly running out of time, I don't know, but I think it's important to talk about some of the timings. I think you mentioned, Tim, about the proposals of the small business plan. That consultation is open until the 23rd of October, so it'd be great if everybody here could take part in that before that time. And we're looking, I'm not part of the government. The government is thinking of implementing that and putting that into legislation in the early part of 2026. So it's coming our way.
Thank you. Now, I was going to say there's one more question each, but for me, I was just going to say, with your sort of P2P hat on, what would you see as being the top drivers for UK businesses to be taking on now, given that, if nothing else, we know the fair payment element is going to be pushed. Hopefully digital invoicing might be pushed.
Yeah.
What would you be recommending businesses to do now?
Well, I think I really do think that you should be looking at your organization as a whole, looking at your processes in terms of the tech as well. But I think what UK business is most concerned with, of course, is stability and growth and revenue. And I think stability, growth and revenue can only be helped by adopting e-invoicing. And you should be leveraging your digitization, looking at AI, and of course, in terms of your people, investing in the people within your organization, and also investing in innovation and continuous learning. And I think if you get all of those things right, then UK business is going to be in a good place. But what do you think, Tim? I mean, what would, in an ideal world, what would your take for the construction industry and for industry as a whole? What should we be looking at?
I think for me, my dream would be fully digital open exchange and all the process efficiencies exploding across the construction sector. There's a lot of things we could be doing, and it's always amazed me that we're still not doing them, and I'm getting old now. But I would probably summarize it here. When people send digital documents, do you include a unique product ID? Do you have a clear unit of measure which can be understood? Yeah. Are you referencing all the other documents that help people to match and clear, know what you're talking about? And as we get into sustainability, things like locations become relevant. So I would just say back to basics, and just do more of it. Be digital, because the fact we're doing so much on paper, is quite scary. And it makes very little sense in some respects. So that would be my wish, because if we can do more digitally, then we really can at that stage start to reap the benefits that makes construction more efficient overall. And we are not efficient compared to other sectors, so there's a lot of opportunity for construction.
Yeah, and I think it's important, isn't it, to talk about, I think it's important as well, to that point you made there, to talk about opportunity, because I think it is an opportunity. But if you're implementing e-invoicing or other elements of digitization across the whole end-to-end procure-to-pay space, that gives you a really good chance to go back to basics, as you say, and look at your processing right from scratch. Because you probably don't do that very often. But if you're going through, okay, we need to put through an implementation piece, it does give you that chance to, in effect, build a really good business case. And I think that gives you that opportunity.
Brilliant. Look, I'm going to read out a couple of the questions that have come through. So I know Laura sat there, but I've got them in front of me. So I'll read them out. Ellen, if you want to have the first reply, and then I'll maybe comment if needs be. So one from Terry Corby basically draws reference to the fact that the reason that construction may be in a mess is because of people like Carillion, Midas and ISG and the number of SMEs that they kind of sent to the wall. Is that a legacy we still have to deal with, or do you think we've learnt the bitter lessons from that?
Do you know, right at the very beginning of this conversation, I nearly mentioned the Carillion word, but I thought, oh no, I'm not going to say that just right now. I'll talk sort of around it as a topic. But I think one of the issues with Carillion was that everybody else thought everybody else was going to sort the issue, and they were considered too big to fail by everybody, by the banks. Everybody else thought everybody else was going to sort it and shore it up. I think we are still in the legacy of that. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it means that we're able to retain that focus. And for those of us who are long in the teeth, like me and Tim, I'm not, you said you were, so
Sure.
um,
I am.
I think that doesn't seem that long ago, and I think out of that we have got the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, which is coming into play on the 1st of September. And the talk that we've had around that, and I think that it's okay to have those as lessons and to have that as a backdrop, because we need to have an incentive to go forward and take advantage of the opportunities that there are, but we also have to have the reasons and perhaps the scary things to give us a little bit of a kick, so that we don't do them again in the future.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it was painful and horrible. I wouldn't want it to have happened, but it happened, and it's happened in a few cases. But it gives us that legacy of pain, if you like, which motivates us to say we can't do that again, because the contractors themselves, live on their supply chain, so it doesn't help anybody. Okay, second question's come in with the proposed late payment legislation. This is anonymous. With the proposed legislation coming through, including maximum payment terms, board level scrutiny, what practical steps should large contractors take now to mitigate compliance risks and reputational damage? I mean, yes, how would you tackle that one?
I think have a look at your current processes. How long are you taking to pay already? Maybe have a ring fence, as I said before, around some of your smaller suppliers, and just have a look at what your tech is doing. Look at your KPIs, like your DPO rates, your days payable outstanding. Look at your straight through processing. And see what you're doing right now, really, and maybe have a look at back a couple of years as well. Are you on the right track, or are you getting worse? So that will give you an idea as to what you need to do going forward. What would you say, Tim?
Yeah, no, I quite agree. I think, in a sense, these should be established policies and procedures. They're going to come under more scrutiny, so make sure they're tough enough, and also make sure they are bedded in, so that they don't fade away. I think that was one of the points that Liz Barclay made as Small Business Commissioner, was that some companies had done the right thing, but then they drifted. It's making sure you have processes that are robust and will stand the test of time.
A little bit like what we were talking about in terms of the government as well. And this, if somebody leaves and goes somewhere else, you don't want all that knowledge to go with them. Same is true as with the talent in your organization, which, again, I know it's a slightly separate issue, but we talk a lot at PPN about the talent gap that there is, a knowledge gap that there is in a lot of organizations, and it's quite a considerable issue. It's not that the knowledge is not necessarily there, it's just not where it might need to be, and you don't find out until it's too late. So you're right, don't lose the information when you move forward.
Yeah, and I think you made a very good point. It's very important that often things are picked up by a person, not a policy and a procedure, and if the person goes, it goes with them. So don't ask sort of Fred or Mary to deal with prompt payment, fair payment, whatever. It needs to be part of your inner procedures. Okay, another question here from Joseph Selwood, basically raising the question about what about self-billing? There's some big gaps and issues around payments where they're self-billing. I confess I can't say much. I used to know quite a bit about the self-billing and that, but I'm not up to speed. So can you help me, Ellen?
What's the question?
Well, the question really is talking about the authentication approach. It basically talks about invoices. We all talk about invoices, invoice receipts, invoice date, but there's a big gap around self-billed, he feels. Could an e-invoice mandate change the approach to self-billing as well?
I don't know, to be honest.
I'd have thought it must do.
Well, I would have thought so. Yeah, I would have thought so. But I think it maybe depends on which approach we go, whether we go to the four corner or five corner model, and that obviously we don't know until the end of the consultation. I think it probably will. But Joe, send me that question, or maybe Tim, you can send me that question again, and I can get it answered from the guys at the top.
Thank you, because that's an interesting question. I'd like to think the answer is it must do, but it's worth checking that it will do,
Yeah.
because it should. Okay, and a last question here that we can fit in. Given it's anonymous, given the UK government's consultation on e-invoicing, what lessons can we learn from countries like Italy and Spain that have already adopted real-time reporting or clearance models, and how might this influence the UK's eventual approach? I think we talked about that a little bit, but do you think we really are going to take note of that, or do you think the UK government is in isolation?
No, I don't think it is in isolation. I know I've been talking to some of the people at HMRC in particular, and I know that they are in fact travelling to the different countries and finding out right from the source, right from the horse's mouth, what they're doing, talking to businesses in several different countries, going there and talking to them, as well as obviously consultation generally. So they are taking those different factors on board, and I think, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, they're hoping to be able to cherry pick. Sounds like we're sort of sitting back and we're able to do exactly as we please, but to some degree that is the case, because we haven't got a mandate in place now. We can take some of the elements that have been used elsewhere in different countries and put them forward, because some things are working very well, as we said, with the PEPL model across Belgium, UAE, and Singapore. Some of those are fairly early, but some other organizations, some other countries, obviously it's been embedded for some time, and we can take those elements on board. And we can even go down the route of using, incentives, as have been the case in New Zealand. So all of those things are up for grabs, and we're going to find out where the land lies, probably sometime towards the end of the year.
Okay, Ellen, thank you. We're hitting on time. Apologies to Joseph. Joseph raised a question about retentions, so we'll perhaps have a look at that, because that is also relevant, and subcontractor costs. So
it is. Maybe. Yeah, I mean, as you know, they're potentially looking at banning those retention payments, and I think that is going to be key, particularly if you're harking back to the comment that we made around Carillion, and when those contractors go bust, what happens to those? I
think his question is saying that, will contractors start to then sort of take a long time to confirm because you haven't got the retention anymore? So yeah.
Well, one of the reasons, Joseph, I think, take part in that consultation, because one of the reasons for that consultation is to make sure that we have got everybody's viewpoints in place, and to make sure that there aren't any unintended negative consequences of those proposals. So if you can see any, or think that there might be some, take part in that consultation and make those points, because that's the whole point of it, of putting it out there, so that the government can use those to make sure that we've got policies and procedures that make sense for UK business.
Fantastic, Ellen. Thank you for that. Everyone who raised questions, thank you for the questions. All of you for taking your time. Apologies, we're 2 minutes over, but hopefully we're close enough that we haven't lost too many of you. But thank you, and we think it's been a useful conversation. I think there'll be a chance to follow up this, certainly when we get the feedback from government later in the year. We will definitely keep on top of it and watch this space, keep in touch. And again, thank you for your time, and I wish you all a very good afternoon.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.